There we are. So in this case, we're going to create, like I said, this is sort of going to be taking, as we can analyze based on our layer panel, and we'll talk about all of this and how we add additional images and that sort of thing to our layer panel. But the takeaway from this is that we have multiple layers. We have like a base layer, which in this case is the sky. We have our sort of foreground image, which is our boat and our subject. We have a mist layer that's been applied over top of them. And then we have this castle layer, and then we have gradients and other adjustment layers that we're going to talk about and be adding to our image. But ultimately, what we're trying to create in this case is we have 4 individual files that we're going to be working with, masking appropriately and combining to create something that is like unlike the starting image. So let's just have a look at sort of these individual files and start the process of putting them together. Okay, so if you have any questions during the process of the workshop, just fire them into Q&A. I'll answer them as we go. If there's anything I can't answer, I will send just send me an email, and then I'll do my best to address it. And the other thing too is just because we're going to be talking specifically about layers and adjustment layers, the questions I'm going to be answering today are in regards to those things. So, but let's get started. The very first thing I'm going to do before I do anything else is I'm just going to, in this case, I've created a folder, and that folder is going to contain all the objects that we're going to be utilizing in this workshop. Freddie asked, are these files available for us to follow along? No, these will not be available to follow along. The reason why is because some of these images are not available for commercial use in this case. So I would just follow along visually. And like I said, this is sort of intended to ask questions as you go along. Timeline for workshops are about an hour. Yeah. So I'm going to open up my image here, the boat image, which is the first in our panel, in edit mode. And what I need to do to this image is I'm going to make a couple notes of this image, because what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to replicate or actually remove the background in this case, with the exception of the dock and our subject and the boats. We want to remove all of that exists in the background, and we're going to replace that and create, like I said, this sort of fantasy background setting. But in order to do that, we need to make proper masking. But there is one thing I'd like to note with this one image before we remove any content. And what I want to note is where the horizon is, or in this case, where sort of the center point is with our the background, because we're going to use that information when we go to place subsequent images. So I'm going to, in this case, utilize our ruler function, which was introduced in 2020, to basically draw forth a ruler and place it onto our image. Just quickly, you can turn on rulers by going to View and Rulers, and it'll pop up there. And actually pulling that guideline as simple as just clicking on the ruler and dragging it down. So I'm going to drag my ruler to about yay. Now we're not going to actually use this ruler, it's just going to be for a visual guide. But as we get rid of the content that exists on the top of our image here, this is going to become more relevant. So the first thing we really have to do in this case is we have to mask a portion of our image away. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the rectangular selection tool, which is this tool right up at the top here. And I'm going to select a portion of this image that we're just going to flat out mask away. And that is, let's say, the top portion here. This is just to quickly get rid of this section. So my selections, instead of being marching ants, have been set to an overlay selection. So that's why you see this red color here. And I'll show you how you can do that. So if I go to select and then overlay options up at the top here, I can change the method by which my overlay appears, or so rather my selection appears. You can change it to marching ants, or in this case, just selection highlighted, like I have here. Or the reverse of that, which is selection exposed. But that's fine. I'm just going to hit OK there. Now, what I want to do is I have one layer here. What I want to do is I want to mask this layer. So I'm going to have that selection active, And then with our layer 1 selected, I'm just going to click the Add Layer Mask. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to invert this mask, because I want to actually keep all of the information that's at the base of here, and I want to remove all of the information that's at the top. So to invert a mask, all I'm going to do is I'm going to have my mask selected, which I do currently, because I'm still working on it. I'm just going to invert that mask. Okay, so I no longer need this selection, so I'm just going to go to select and deselect, and then we'll talk about what's happened here. So we have no layer that exists beneath our dock image here. So when we don't have any image underneath of our image, what happens is it displays it as a transparency, which is what's occurring in this checkered box area. If I was to place an image underneath of my layer, in this case, I'll just add a blank layer and then I'll fill it up with a color. You'll see that I'm just going to fill it up with, let's say fill it up with like a mauvey color here. What you're going to see is that the area that is filled, in this case, this layer 2, is filled with that mauve color. Now, the top portion of our mask, which is indicated by this black section right here on our mask preview, is invisible. Whereas the bottom section, this white section, is visible, which corresponds to what you see on the image right here. So when we're working with masks, what we want to do is we want to remember that, in this case, making the mask black is going to take away visual information from that image, and in this case, leaving the mask white is going to present that visual information. So when we have our layer 1, in this case, our boat image with our subsequent mask, and it appears over top of our layer 2, it makes sense that the area that we've made, this black area here, to be transparent is no longer visible, while the white area that is at the bottom is visible. So let's illustrate this a little bit more actively, because all we have right now is essentially just a box. I'm going to zoom in on our image here. So I'm just going to zoom in using this tool right here. And I'm going to make sure that I'm sort of in the area where, because I want to actually redefine our subject here. When we work with masks, one of the big elements of a mask versus just editing directly onto your image is that the mask in itself is non-destructive and can be edited at any point. So when I'm working with our image here, I'm going to be working with a combination of the image itself and the mask. For this purpose right here, what we want to do is we want to brush on our subject again, because that information is currently just hidden. If I disable this mask on layer 1 in that I get rid of it entirely, I'm not deleting it, I'm just not showing it, you'll see that our whole image comes back and we have our subject. So all of this information is still present within our image, it's just hidden from view. So I'm just going to re-enable that mask. To interact with a mask, what we need to do is we need to select a brush. So I'm just going to have my mask selected, and I'm going to select my brush tool up at the top. And then what I want to do is I want to brush onto my area here where I think my subject is. And you'll see as I do that, she's going to appear. Now I'm going to remove all the feathering from my nib and probably reduce the spacing. I'll just increase the size slightly. So I have my little foreground picker and my background picker. If I paint white, in this case, this white foreground color, onto the black portion of our image, in this case, the mask right here, you'll see that we're basically re-brushing on that section of the image. We're enabling that part of the image to be seen. So what we're going to do is we're just going to brush on right here on our subject. I'm just going to double check to make sure. Seems to be a slight differentiation between the two colors here. Ah, I see. Sorry, I accidentally stopped sharing there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to double check once my screen goes away there. Yeah, this is truly white. Okay, so this is interesting, actually. This is a relevant point. So I made a mistake here. And the mistake is that when I went to go select my foreground color, I assumed that it was true white. To make sure that your foreground color when interacting with a mask is true white, what we want to do is click this little tiny set of buttons here and then make sure that our foreground color is set to one of the white or black. What actually happened, because I filled my background layer with that nice mauve color, it appeared very bright, but it wasn't white. So when I go to brush on my image here, what you can see is that there's a slight differentiation in terms of color from the area where I brushed on that mauve color and where the true white is. So what I want to do is I'm just actually going to replace this really quickly by brushing on again with true white instead of a color that's very, very close to white in this case. Okay, so I'm actually just going to hide layer 2 because it's no longer relevant for what we're doing. So what I want to do is, now that I've got my subject reappeared, I'm just going to refine this selection. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to brush all these little individual little areas. I'm just going to make sure my chat and QA is up. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in. And then one of the nice things about using this, oh, not now. Heavens me, not now. One of the nice thing about using the foreground and background color, the brushing in conjunction with the mask, is that when I right click, in this case, or sorry, when I left click, we're painting on that information. And then when I right click, we're erasing that information. So we're utilizing the foreground color and the background color in respect. So left is white, right click is black. So what in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in really tight on my subject, and I'm going to go through the process of just like cleaning up this background area, try to get it as tight as possible to our subject. And I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible because we still need to cover quite a bit in this. But I want to just go around and fix this. Let's increase spacing. And maybe increase the size of the nib width slightly. I have no feathering currently just because I want this to look really tight upon the subject. I don't want there to be much like frill that appears on the edge. To give you an idea of the difference between the two, we can just go about adding feathering, and then you'll see that it's much more gradual versus much more abrupt when we reduce feathering. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around. I'm going to paint and sort of just clean up the edges of this. Forgive the slight delay of running the workshop while also running the selection process. So what we want to do when we're finalizing this experience, when we're sort of done our selection in this case, is we're going to want to clean up the base area as well. And we're going to do that by brushing in addition to using a couple different tools. One of the main things about creating composite images is you want to do fairly accurate selections wherever possible. So we want to be making like really clean selections. And in this case, one of the benefits of using the brush tool and going in really tight is that we can sort of make sure that it's exactly to the edge. We don't want any like white sort of appearing around our subject in this case. Anything that would not make it, that would sort of like give it the appearance of having a bit of like a rough feathering around the edge. So I'm just about done. I'm just going to, again, like I'm kind of rushing through this here. We're just going to tighten that up. I'll probably have to clean this up a little bit more as we go, but that's good for now. And then I'll clean that up. Okay. And then I'm going to just feather this slightly on the edges. There we are. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to place another layer underneath this layer, and we're going to see what we'll need to fix. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to place our cloud layer, the layer that we want to appear in the background instead of the background that we've masked out. In this case, we're going to drag it from our timeline, or rather our film strip at the base here. And I'm just going to drag it underneath our layer 1. So now we have our layer 3, in this case, the cloud layer, and our layer 1 that exists right beneath it. So this layer, the cloud layer in this case, is now taking visual precedence over layer 1 because it's higher in the hierarchy of layers than layer 1. So we don't have any effect that would make this sort of interact with the base layer at all. In this case, there's no opacity on this layer, there's no masking or anything like that. So in order to make this appear underneath our layer 1, we actually have to move it beneath it. So in that case, we're moving it underneath, and now it's taking up more visual precedence than the layer above it. And then you'll notice here that we have some gray that we want to get rid of still from the base section here, where the appears next to the boats here. So we're going to do that very shortly. And then, like I said, I want to fix some of the edges around the hair here. Okay. Just going to pop open my chat again because I think I've missed it. There we go. Okay. So what I want to do is now I have this layer 3 and it exists beneath our masked layer 1. What I want to do is I want to clean up this section, this gray section. So I think the best way I can think of to get rid of this section or to sort of clean this up is to use the smart brushing, the smart selection tool in the brush and sort of paint away that area. So I need to do one thing first. I need to make sure that I'm actually selected the layer 1 picture layer, not the mask layer. So I'm going to make sure that that's the case first. And then I'm going to navigate over to our brush selection tool. And with the brush selection tool, we can choose a couple different methods to select an area. Again, I'll probably zoom in slightly. Yeah, maybe that's fine. Perfect. And then I want to smart brush, or set our smart brush rather, to a combination of both color and brightness, which in this case is going to be checking for hues that are similar and also like tones that are similar. So magic is a culmination of both of those things. Tolerance is what we're going to set to allow more information to be gathered when we go to make our brush strokes, which I'll explain in greater detail in a second. And then for the current time being, I think we'll leave our nib width and feathering as it is. Let's just see what this looks like. So if I smart brush on this area, you'll see that as I get closer to these boats here, it kind of ignores the content of them. And that's because our principal selection is this gray background, the area where the water was. So as I move, it's being very good about trying to not select any area that isn't that same gray tonally and in terms of the hue that we've selected over here. So whatever's in the center of your magic selector, in this case, this brush selection tool, is what we're selecting. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to do a good enough job as I can to take out those components. There's a couple more over here. Now, tolerance is really interesting because if we lower tolerance, it's going to be much more discriminatory in regards to what elements it picks up. You'll see that as I brushed over on the right-hand side here, there's little speckling that occurs. And that's because it wants the variation of color and tone to be much finer. If we just crank this to the very top, it's going to be much less selective of that. So we'll find some sort of middle ground, and we'll go through, and we're just going to select all this gray out as much as we can. And then we're going to do something with this gray shortly here. Just want to do a best job I can of just going around and selecting that. Now there's going to be more lighter grays in this section right here, as you can see. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to draw the tolerance up and see how much we can get or capture within the brushing selection process, which it seems here is actually pretty good. We're just going to struggle down at the base here where there's grays and browns that are similar, but we can clean this up. So we're going to go around. We're just about done here. I'm going to zoom in on our boat here, and we're going to fix some of this. Okay. Yeah, so perfect. It's only really right here, but we can clean that up by hand. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make my nib width much smaller. I'm just doing this actually by using the scroll wheel on the mouse. You can scroll to make it smaller or larger. And then I'm going to, while maintaining my magic brush here, I'm just going to right click on the areas that I don't want to select, which is actually the dock here. I just don't want the dock, that's all. And I'm trying to get rid of any of that red that appears in the area that I don't want. So this is a big component of composite images, is again making accurate selections and not trying to go over anything that you don't want to alter. Now, whenever possible, we're gonna make the ACDSee Ultimate 2020 do our decision-making processes for us, but some instances have to be dealt with, in this case, by hand. So I'm just gonna go through, and I'm just about done. There we go. So let's zoom out and let's have a look of what we've selected. So around our subject, the subject being the dock, the character here, the woman, we have this red selection process, which is in this case, the gray waters that we want to remove. With our selection complete, what do we want to do? Well, we want to navigate now to the mask, because this is the section that we want to mask out of the image. What we don't want to do is erase this content from our base layer permanently. That would be a destructive change. We don't want that. What we want to do is non-destructively remove that from the mask here in order to selectively complete brushing away this area. Okay, so with our brush still active, what we're going to do is, or rather with our selection still active, what we're going to do is we're going to navigate over to the brush tool. Okay. And then what we want to do is we want to make this disappear. So we're going to make our foreground color, in this case, black, by swapping the colors. And then we're going to slightly increase the nib width and maybe slightly increase the feathering. And we're just going to go and we're going to brush within our selection. Now I have something clicked over here that's very important. So when we have an active selection and then we're going to move into the brush tool, there exist these two little icons that appear here. So the first one is use selection. So when we have use selection highlighted, when we go to brush within this area, it's going to make sure that we don't move past it into the content that we actually want to save. And then the invert selection, which is right next to it, would do the opposite of that. It would basically invert our selection so that it's exactly the opposite of what we want to select. So we're not going to utilize that, but we are definitely going to utilize the first thing, which is the use selection. Brush is black. Let's begin painting this away. So now, as you can see, I'm definitely going over top of the content that we haven't selected here. And there's going to be some certain things we'll have to clean up as we go through, but it's going to do a fairly good job of making sure that all of our content here we're erasing. Okay. Then I'm going to go do this side here, and we'll disable this selection shortly so we can see the result of what we're removing from view. Okay, I think there was only one area that had a slight issue, so that's fairly good. I'm going to double check this. There might be some cleaning and edging that we'll have to fix on the very corners here, but that is pretty much done, I'd say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to select and then deselect, and we can see what we've missed, which is not much. So let's go and clean up the rest of that. And again, the purpose of this is to get as close as possible to our subject. I'm just going to remask this on right here. Mask that away. And then I'm going to clean up this section right here and this little edge corner here as well. Now we're going to be applying some effects to this area as well. So we don't need to do an extremely tight job with this, but we're just going to fix up any glaring errors that we see. Now, because when we went through doing that selection process, we had our tolerance set to around 80%, that's part of the reason why we're seeing these sort of sections here being missed, is because when we have our tolerance set to, when we're making that selection process, we can only get so good when we have our tolerance a little bit softer. So if our tolerance was cranked and we could make our selections a bit easier with that, then we would have less of this sort of granular area that we'd have to remove. But the problem then is because we have a background that has complicated differences in grays. So what we kind of want to do is we need to just find the middle ground here. So again, we're going to go through and we're going to try to clean up as much of this as possible. And again, it's not going to be perfect. What we might do is actually add a bit of feathering so that we can get a more smoother. Oh yeah, way better. That's what we want. I don't know what I was doing before. Okay, and then we'll move throughout the rest of our image here and clean up any other additionals, which there is a couple here. Yes, Glenn, it will be archived. Yeah, I put all of them on YouTube so that people can watch them after the fact. So I will put this one on YouTube. Probably it's going to be a couple days. I try to get them up the next day. So because they're often longer videos, they're about an hour. They take a little bit longer to edit down and sort of sequence out. But I always put them up on our YouTube page, so you can find that likely tomorrow or the next day. So I'm just going and I'm going around, and I'll link the YouTube channel after I'm done this selection here, just so you have a chance. All of our workshops since mid-2019 have been up there. And then we have our workshop that we did with Alec Watson as well that went really good. So I'm just going through and I'm removing any of this gray water area that we couldn't quite capture during the selection process. But it's looking pretty good. And we're just about done. And I'm using a very fine brush because I don't want to, pardon me, remove anything too vital. And go around over here. Yeah, thanks for the question though, Glenn. I appreciate that. Yeah, we definitely put everything up on our YouTube channel. Trying to get as much content as possible because, again, like I've done a workshop similar to this in the past, but it's probably been about a full year since I've done something similar to this. So it's always nice to have content that repeats itself so that people can be reminded, or maybe content that people haven't seen before. Okay. So I'm just going to make this a bit smaller and go through and, okay, that's close enough for the kind of people I work with. So I still need to clean up the hair area very obviously here. That needs work. And we're going to get that done with the feathering. And then we're just a little bit more on this side. Without taking up too much time here. One of the big things about composite images, like I said, is you really want to take your time as you go through. These really matter. Like your selections are really, really important. In this case, obviously we're masking, but I consider that a part of the selection process. Oh, nice. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay. Ah, I see. Okay, we'll pass that. So this is a really interesting section here because layer 3 only goes to that point right there. And then our layer 1, rather, if we don't have anything within this content, it's going to display that transparency. So I'm just going to, I don't know, round that out so they can you can still see that. But if we wanted to, we would just duplicate our layer 3 and place it underneath that, so that we could use something of the similar color to sort of just hide, in that case, that area. Just trying to be creative as possible with the space. Okay, so we'll have a look now. I think that's fairly good. Again, just that area, but we'll clean that up in a second. Okay, so that's starting to seem in the realm of plausible, especially in the foreground here where we cleaned up the boats. Maybe the one thing you'd want to do is clean up those little holes right there so you can get through a little bit of blue, but for the purpose of what we're showing here, I think that's pretty good. One thing I would also do is I would move this closer to that horizon point that we talked about earlier. So if we're really being honest, that's closer to where the horizon line is, right there, which matches what our original image looked like before we disabled the mask, right about there as well. So we want to maintain any like natural aspects of our original image and just utilize those tools to sort of present this information. Let's save this image, or rather let's save this as an ACDSee file so we have a copy of it as we go through. So our first real selection is sort of complete. So I'm going to save this within the same folder, and I'm just, yeah, let's just call this Skyboat. Oops. There we go. And I'll save as an ACDSee file format. It's going to take a second to write. And then we will work with our second layer here, which is going to be just a mist layer that we want to apply here. But perhaps maybe one of the first things we should address is to fill this little corner here. So let's actually hide using the I button our boat and subject layer. So this layer still exists, but it's just hidden from view. And then what we want to do is we want to select our layer 3. And then just using the lasso selection tool, we'll just do this. I'm just going to make a selection of this blue area here. And I'm literally just going to copy that and paste that. And as I paste that, it'll be placed on a new layer on layer 4. Masking around hair is the hardest. In this case, I would suggest using a combination of tools. The brush selection tool is very good, but if you have a lot of grainy particular detail, what might be better is actually using something called the pixel selection tool or the luminosity selection tool, which we'll actually be covering in a second. But it is really based on what the background color of your image is. So if you have an image that has like clear background colors or like a blurry background, you're going to have better selections than that have intense granularity in the background of your image. We'll explain that. But basically, all I've done currently is I've just copied this little section here. And what we're going to do is we're going to place it and then blend it in underneath that area as to hide the sort of checkered mark. So I'm just going to commit this layer after I've moved it. And let's see if we need to play. Yeah, so we need to move it slightly more, don't we? So I'll just go back to our layer 4 here that we've copied and pasted. And I'm just going to slide it over. And honestly, what I might do is just mask this layer 4. And then with a brush, our brush here, and a black foreground color, I'll probably just pop up the nib width and just work it in a little bit. Now, using feathering is going to be really vital here because it basically enables us to mimic the effect of the cloud itself. So we've just softened that area and filled it with content that already pre-exists in our image. Because it's going to drive me absolutely insane if I don't. Let's fix this hair. This hair is pretty forgiving, like what Jim was talking about earlier. Part of the reason why it's kind of forgiving is because her hair in this case doesn't extend out in many curls or flowing areas. But we'll just do our sort of best job with feathering to kind of clean up this area. Oh, well, of course, making sure that we're on the right mask. That's always key. And I'm going to reduce the feathering quite a bit, actually. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to utilize the right and left click to sort of address any mistakes that I've made as I've gone through. And all I want to do is I just want to soften this area. I just want to make it look perceivably fairly clean and flush. I don't necessarily need this to be perfect in that it follows the contour of the hair ideally. But if you have hair that is straight, what you can always use is the Polygonal Selection tool to sort of mask it out even better. And what I can do is I can illustrate that for you right now. So let's actually just refill this section and use that tool. So I'm just going to refill this section with the hair information. And then I'm going to, while I want to still be selecting my mask layer, I'm going over to the Polygonal Selection tool. And then I'm just going to, which is right up at the top here, I'm going to probably use add, which means I can make multiple selections. And I'm just going to go around. You might have noticed that the feathering was applied when I selected the Polygonal Selection tool. We can undo that in a second here. But I'm just going to go around to the edge of the hair and sort of clean this up as best I can to make it look as accurate on our subject as possible. We'll be using the, we'll be using the pixel selection, or so rather the pixel selection tool in a second here to illustrate another method of selecting. Oops, right clicked. There we go. And then what we're going to do is very similar to what we did with the background of the boat. We're just going to erase those sections. So I'm going to fill in the rest of this area here. And we'll just double click here. Okay, so first of all, let's remove that feathering. There we go. And I'll go back to my brush selection tool, and I'm going to combine it with the Polygonal Selection tool to just get that area right here. And there. Okay. And then what I want to do is I want to erase the opposite of this. So with my hair selected in this case, I will now invert. And oops, let's see here. What do I want to do? I want to not invert the mask. Oh, that's right. I want to go back to my brush tool. And I want to make sure that I'm using my selection, but I'm going to invert my selection. And I'm going to erase with the black foreground color the background. And so this is going to do a good job of keeping it tight. And this will look a little bit smoother and crisper than our first pass that we did with our hand. And then we can clean up the edge here. Awesome. Select, deselect. Yeah, and then I'll just do that. Oops. Okay. That is much nicer than before. So we'll zoom out. And then what we can do is add our mist layer that I want to add right at the base of this boat here. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull another layer onto our subject here, or above our subject here. This is just like a simple mist layer that I got off of like a Getty stock. In this case, what we can use is there's lots of varieties of like websites that allow their users to freely submit images, and smoke is fairly easy to get. So we're just going to place our smoke down at the base here, but we're actually going to use it with a like a low opacity pass. So what I'm going to do is with my layer selected, I'm just going to, let's see here. I'm just going to use lighten, which is one of the blend modes. So earlier when we were talking about layer order, we were talking about layer order always using precedence in this case. I'm just going to lower the opacity too to make it look a bit more realistic. So when we use masks, or so when we use images, then we use a blend mode. All of these are different blend modes. They have different effects, but what they always do is that they blend it with the content that exists below them. So in this case, when we just have this applied as a normal blend mode and the opacity set to maximum, this obviously takes up visual precedence over images, over our images that appear beneath it. But if we use different blend modes, you see that they have different effects. Multiply, in this case, maintains the darks and removes the lights. Screen does quite literally the opposite, in that it utilizes sort of these lighter components and displays them while removing all of the black components. Soft light has a different effect. Overlay will have a different effect, etc. But the one that we're going to be using is lighten, which is, in this case, similar to screen, but I believe it like preserves a little bit more of a natural appearance here. So we're going to, I want to set to a noticeable opacity, so around I think 25, so just a quarter opacity looks pretty good. And yeah, I just want to set it over top of our dock here. I want it to look fairly natural. I want this to look like a misty morning around a dock. If you've ever set foot on a dock at a misty morning, it's going to give it that appearance of that. What I also want to do at this point, I think, is I want to set a vignette. And the reason why I want to set a vignette is because I want there to be less emphasis placed on the edges of this image and more on the center of the focus. So with my vignette placed, this will probably always exist at the very top of our image. But I'm also just going to dramatically reduce the values on this because we don't need it to be that dark. So let's go about half values. And let's reduce the distance slightly and increase the shape. And let's see, strength, probably reduce the strength. Okay, so this vignette is going to be placed over top of all of our images and sits roughly right there. Okay, so I want to add this like kind of funky looking castle render image to just above our cloud line here. But before we do so, another thing I want to do is I want to snag some of these clouds to place over top of that castle layer so it fits kind of seamlessly instead of looking like chunky and obviously placed as a square image over top of that. So let's hide all of our layers with the exception of our cloud. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to once again use this lasso selection tool. And I think what we're going to do is I'm going to place my castle about yay. So what I want to do is I want to snag some of this cloud layer right here. And we'll end up blending this. So we'll just snag that. And I'm going to copy and paste. And then we'll place this layer 6 above our layer 5 that we've hidden here. And we'll move this in a second. Let's get back all of our other layers. And then I'm just going to drag and drop this castle layer in between our layer 5 and our layer 6. And we're going to make it way smaller because it doesn't need to be that big. And we want it, oh, still too big, maybe about that big. And I want to flip it, so I'm just going to flip it. Oops, not like that. It's still maintaining aspect ratio. So we'll just hold down Shift and we'll click the edges here, and I'm just going to swap them about like that. And then what I want to do is I'll just commit this layer, but I want to place my layer 6 above my layer 7, which is the castle layer here. And let's just see how that impacts it. Yeah, so we'll end up blending this in a second here, but for right now, that's fine. So I probably want it about like that, maybe. We'll just hide that layer for now. And then let's take a look at this layer. Okay, so our castle layer here is nicely located on, in this case, like a white background, which we desperately want to get rid of. And we can use a couple different methods. We could use the magic wand selection tool to select only the white. But then I'd have to clean up some of the granularity in here, so I don't think I'll use that. What I want to use on this layer is, Linda, I have used a tablet in the past, but I actually just use a mouse for all my work. I'm just so used to it at this point, so yeah. What I want to do is I actually want to use pixel targeting. So pixel targeting is kind of it's actually a really cool tool. So I'm just going to go to select and pixel targeting. And it enables you to select via a couple different methods. In this case, you can select with tones and with colors, or both. I just want to select all colors within the tone of white. So what I'll do is I'll reduce all of these to 0, and I'll just absolutely crank the whites in this case. And what you'll see is my red area, the area that appears along the edge, this is the area that is my selection in this case. And this is perfect because what we want to do is we want to get rid of the whites in here. So we could do that, but as I'm thinking out loud, I'm wondering if we just do this, if it will select everything else. Yeah, so you could just kind of do the other way. I think I'm going to do it this way. So I'll just draw forth all of these other meters other than the white because we don't want to select the white. And I'll just hit OK. And then with my layer 7 active, I'll just make sure to mask it using the add layer mask. And let's see how good of a job it did. Yeah, so perfect. So we are going to make definitely going to make some changes to this image in a second here, but for the time being, that's perfect. And it's placed roughly where we want it to be. So I'm going to click on my layer 6, which is that cloud layer that we've added, and unhide it. And adding a layer mask now to this image as well, I'm going to brush on with a black brush and a fairly high feathering. I'm just going to feather around the edges of this, kind of just make it fit in with the rest of our clouds here. Yeah, clean up this area too. I might actually even move it up. We could probably move it up slightly. And I might rotate it slightly as well. But again, the purpose of this is to sort of just fit it snugly in that area and make it feel like there's a bit of a clouds that sort of even go up and past the castle itself. And we can duplicate this, and we probably will. So I'm just going to right-click this and, oops, commit first of all, and then right-click that and duplicate the layer. And we'll just move it over here as well. Maybe change the direction slightly and hit commit. And that's going to place those two layers. So now we have this castle layer that exists with the clouds placed lovingly over top of it here. I've just noticed that there's a bit of a faint outline around our subject or castle layer here. So I'd like to address that. So I'm just going to go into my layer 7, and what I'll do is I'll blend the edges of that as well. So with black, I'm just going to go in and just clean up the edges of that so I don't see that little square outline that occurs on the edge. Can you select a layer with the mouse touching what you want to select? Let me think about what you mean. Can you select a layer with the mouse touching what you want to select? Oh, like, can I select this castle layer with the mouse? Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, okay. So yeah, there is a function I'm fairly familiar of within oh yes, within like something like Photoshop where you auto select the subject. There isn't a similar function within ACDSee yet. I've always find those tools really frustrating because when you click on something that you didn't mean to click on, it then either moves it or adjusts it in ways that you find like irrational, you didn't expect to. Currently, right now, the only way to select the layer, to have the active layer, is to make sure that it's selected in the same way that you go about selecting a mask. but dragging and dropping just objects from within the canvas itself don't actually move the objects. Hopefully that helps. That might be a function worth exploring, and if it is a function like an auto suggested click, basically, then yeah, just shoot me an email. I'll suggest it to the developers. So I have my image here. The image itself, actually, of the castle is quite a different color than that of like the rest of the interactive space that we're working with. So I definitely want to fix that. It's just too gray. I don't know. We need to make it blend more in with the background. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm actually going to apply a white balance adjustment. So with my layer 7 active, I'm just going to go down to white balance. And let's just increase, or rather let's decrease the temperature to make it more blue, and then let's increase the rosiness of it. And what you may notice is, as we've done this, there's a discrepancy between the layers that exist above it, in this case, the clouds that we placed above that layer, and the rest of the content. So I'm going to crank these values so you can really see what I mean. Do you see how there's this area here we pasted those clouds? Well, that makes sense, right? Because this white balance is placed beneath it, and then therefore is taking taking less visual priority than the images that appear beneath it, or above it rather. But the problem here is we don't want this white balance to affect all of the layers that exist beneath it. We just want the white balance layer to affect the castle that appears beneath it. So when that is the case, what we do is we click the clip button. So clip will clip that effect, in this case the white balance effect, to the layer that appears, well, the image layer rather, that appears directly beneath it. So let's fix the values because that's still pretty egregious. And that's closer to what we wanted than the original here. The original was like way light. So let's disable that. Let's see here. Go back into the values. And that's a bit warmer and a little bit closer than what we wanted. It's less of that tan color that appeared. We may also apply a vibrancy adjustment. So I'll go down and click Vibrance. And what do we want to do? Maybe what we want to do is crank the saturation on our image, and maybe apply it as a low opacity so that it's not so overwhelming. But if we were to look at that with and without, you can definitely see the effect in the sky. So that looks pretty good. We may actually move this vibrance adjustment above the two other layers just so it captures those as well. We don't need to clip this layer to anything. And then what we may also do is, let's take this sort of really nice gradient cloud layer that I have. I'm going to place it at the very top of our image here. Right there, beneath our vignette. And then what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to apply, let's say soft light, and see how that looks, reducing the values on that. What I want to do with this effect is I really just kind of want to further blend and make the colors seem unanimous. So when you're looking at most composition images, so if you look up like composite image inspiration or something like that on like YouTube or on Google, what you'll see is that the user has used a lot, the creator rather has applied a lot of like color effects that are over top of the base layers. And the reason for that is because you're working with layers that have dramatically different sets of tones and innate colors. Some images might be really like dry and low in saturation, and some images might be oversaturated. And so you can tweak every individual image, which we should, but we should also go through the process of applying layers that exist over top of it that sort of further enmesh and make our images feel natural and feel like the color space is somewhat equivalent. So I might just slightly increase the opacity on that. And then, so we have this, our subject here, we have our boats underneath of it with the mist layer applied. We've gone ahead and we've added our castle, and a variety of effects that sort of make it feel more dramatic and fantasy-like than when we started. Let's just take a look at the original. Okay, that's the one that we saved a second ago. And then that's the one with the changes. So prior to the cleanup and prior to the mist layer and the castle. What I last want to add is actually a gradient map. I love gradient maps, and when applied gently, they look so good. So I'm going to keep the highlights as orange, and I'm going to adjust the shadows. Let's just say let's make them a pink color. And then what I want to do with this is I want to blend it, obviously, because that's crazy looking. So I'll go up to the blend mode, and then we'll select overlay. And then I'm going to dramatically reduce the opacity once again. And this is going to further enmesh our image and make it feel natural. And in this case, it's just beneath the vignette. Yeah, and I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go down to maybe 18 or 15 on that one just to reduce it slightly more. But that, again, that gives us homogenization because it takes all of the shadows in all of the parts of our image here and says, okay, cool, I see those shadows. What do you want to fill those shadows with color-wise? And then taking the highlights and doing the same. And so this is like a really quick and fun way visually to sort of blend those images together and work with the pre-existing conditions and try to get them to fit. What I would also probably do here is I would definitely want to add maybe something that makes this feel a bit darker just underneath the water in between the boats. So I'd place a blank layer there. And maybe what I would do is I would select the foreground color and a darker blue, and I would just blend something in there, you know, just to give it a bit of a appearance of being a bit darker. And I like that too because it contrasts this section right here. I would probably just reduce the opacity slightly, and that fits in. Another thing we might want to do with our layer here is just go down to our FX panel and add a slight shadow. Not that great, but we'll dramatically reduce the opacity again, and we'll change the direction to face downwards. And the blur, will increase the blur so it feels a bit more natural as well. So, and what this is doing too is because the light is coming from this direction, it then forces the shadows downwards. And I think that's going to be where we will finish up with in regards to that image. So what have we covered in regards to this workshop? What I really wanted to cover is, again, looking at our layers, looking with masks, and how do we use these things in a creative way that we can apply and sort of get those effects that give us the ability to create really fun, interesting, composite-looking images. And ACDSee, much like Photoshop and other products, has the ability to use these masks in creative ways, use things like clip to and copying sections of our image to apply. What we forget when we use these products is just the variety of methods of getting similar effects. And in regards to strong selections, we talked about a couple of those. We talked about like the methods of selecting around our subject by us sort of removing and erasing around our selections. We used the pixel targeting tool to remove just a single solitary white. You know, we can use our brush selection tool. We can use our wand selection tool. We could even use things like, after our image is created in this case, we can use things like luminosity selection to, to select entire groupings of our image that are brighter, right? Or we can reverse that. We can inverse that process so that we can select all of the darker components of our image. We have so many methods of creating accurate, interesting selections. And obviously, it's still going to require some significant refinement in working with that image, but we have methods of getting these things. Yeah. And so I like this example in regards to a sort of a composite image, because really when we look at it, how many images are we actually adding to this? Not many. There's like 5 layers here. you know, this is a simple one to create. You know, there's a cloud layer, there's a base layer that you've removed the sort of background from, and then you have your like castle layer or some sort of building that you want to add in the background, and then adjusting it with a variety of different adjustment layers and blend modes and that sort of thing. So anyway, today, friends, that's our workshop. Our workshop in regards to creating a composite image. I really hope you find this useful. And like I said, I do want to put this on YouTube so you can find it there tomorrow. This was pretty low in terms of the questions. That's fine. If you have any questions now, I'd be happy to answer them. I'll stick around for a bit. And then what I'll do is I'll also re-enter my email again so that you guys can email me. Excuse me, I've been talking so much. You can email me and ask me any question, or if you have a suggestion for the developers, please email me. I'm a fast way to get that information to them. Or if you have any question, of course, that I can't answer, I will also ask the developers. But I just really appreciate you sticking around and watching this workshop. You know, like I really like doing these, and I think like ACDSee is an extremely versatile product. I mean, it is an amazing digital asset management tool, you know, but it's also a pretty substantially creative and valuable layered editor. And like, as you can see today, we can create some pretty unique effects just with a handful of tools. So yeah, lots of new stuff. Yeah, I mean, and again, most people use ACDSee as a manager, right? And they use it as a raw editor in develop mode, which obviously we didn't even touch base and talk about it all today. But yeah, there's a lot going on in edit mode that's really worth exploring and helps people create some pretty cool changes to their images. So yeah, thank you, Glenn. I just again really appreciate it. Let me see. There's some more questions here too. Yeah, no problem. Noah, thank you so much for popping in. Linda asked, this is all done with Ultimate 2018 as well. Much of what you see here you can do, Linda, with 2018. I would definitely play around with it. There might be some tools that are in 2020, and forgive me, it's been a while. It's been 2 years since 2018 came out. So there's probably some tools I maybe covered today, like perhaps maybe luminosity selection, or there might be some things that came up that would be not in 2018. But I would say give it a shot. I know for a fact you can create composite images in 2018, absolutely. That was when I started really doing more composite image tutorials, because 2018 added a lot of features for that. So have at her, as they say. Yeah, it depends on which plugins you mean. So in ACDSee, you can use plugins to edit images, but it generally requires you to flatten them. So what I would suggest is maybe prior to going into creating a composite image, or when you maybe edit those individual layers with your plugins and then create your composition, or alternatively finish creating your composition and then use your plugin. There will be, yeah, I don't think that it's going to be able to read an ACDSee file in a foreign editor, so that probably won't be the case. And then other methods that I can think of doing the same thing. Oh, another thing you could do is you can absolutely add a lookup table, like a LUT, to your process. That LUT will 100% be editable in the layer panel. To add a LUT is just to go down to the bottom right-hand corner. So if you use LUTs like editors, you can import your LUTs here, and that will be just 100% a part of ACDSee's process. But plugins would probably require flattening. All right. Freddie asked, oh yeah, and again, if you have any questions about LUTs, shoot me an email. But I've actually been meaning to do a tutorial on them. LUTs are really simple. Like, you just, in edit mode, you simply go down to import LUT and you select a file. We support 3DL files and also cube files, as you can see right here. LUTs are freely available online. They rule. They're really cool, and you can also use them in develop mode on your raw images as well, if that matters to you. But yes, I will do a tutorial on that soon. Glenn, thank you so much for participating. I appreciate it. Freddie, I have a question for the developers regarding the first question about sorting by in manage mode. It says click view and then sort by, then date taken. I did that, but it keeps reverting to file name. Oh, isn't it? You can't set it as a default. Okay, well, I guess we're done with this image now. So I'll just save. Let's take a look. Save my sky boat. And then we'll have a look at that. But yeah, I think that is possible that it maybe doesn't remember it the next time you open up ACDSee. But there should be a way to set it as like the default, or yeah, well, let's have a look at it. I rarely, but yeah, exactly where to set it globally, like you said. But if I can't figure it out, then send me an email and I'll ask the developers, because that's something too where if that doesn't exist in the software, it's fairly simple to add. But okay, let's take a look. Whenever this is done saving. There's our, let's see here, our 175 megabyte file here. Okay. So let's go to a different folder with some images. Okay, so if you go to, let's just go to our landscapes folder. And you said view, but I'm gonna go group because that allows us to go by day taken. I don't, you might be able to look at by view, but this just makes sense from a standpoint of grouping. So if I then, okay, so I have it set to group. Okay, and then if I was to navigate to a different mode, let's say we navigate to develop mode, and then if we navigate back, is it going to undo that? Let's find out. Okay, so blah, 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 exposure change, contrast change, back to manage mode. Let's save that. And it remembers the grouping. So alternatively, if we close the program and we reopen the program, will it remember the grouping? Find out shortly. It seems to remember the grouping. Okay, so what other do we have? I did put close reopen AC, it reverts to file name, hundreds of photos all the time, same date, but 3 different cameras. Yeah, okay, they're all different file names. Oh, okay, but this is, in this case, the grouping is checking to see the date and time. I guess in this case, because it's a stock image, it's looking for the time that it's been added. But you're trying to sort it by date and time, but also by separate cameras. Is that correct? Okay. I wonder if you can add a camera as a cataloging function. Let's go to Organize, Smart Collections, Create Collection, New Collection, sure. Can I change the values of this? Okay, that's not gonna work. So how would I create a category for a camera? Freddie, I don't think I'd be able to answer this quickly. I would say email me. The developer can get back to me in regards to this. I can do one of these things, which is sort by your camera. I could probably, like we've showed, I can sort by date, but I don't know if I can do both at the same time. Yeah, email me. We'll find out your answer. I promise. Barb, I'm very new to ACDSee, and as a senior citizen, find it almost overwhelming to understand. However, I really want to learn how to use what I have for digital scrapbooking, and will continue to work towards that goal. I found your skill with the program very helpful, and at least showing me what is possible. Thanks so much for doing a good job on this webinar. Oh, well, thank you, Barb. I really appreciate that, obviously. What I might suggest is if you are new and you want content to watch, I would really suggest looking into what Alec Watson has done on our YouTube page. You can also go to our website and go to tutorials up at the very top of our website, and there's a section dedicated to Alec. Alec has taken basically he's done an entire series on how to use the product, but from the ground up. So if you're very new to it, which it sounds like, it might be worth watching that video series, which I think is about 12 videos. And again, it will teach you sort of how to use it, and in a way that I think you'll find will be fairly it'll just take it through in a way that's like easy to understand and simple and doesn't overwhelm you with information. So I would look into that. Alternatively too, for digital scrapbooking, that's going to be entirely using manage mode for the most part. What I would also suggest too, if you go to our tutorials page again on our website, we have our manage mode workshop. So I did this last year, and it was entirely dedicated to using manage mode. It's an hour and 35 minutes, if I can remember correctly, and I would check that out. I think it's a really useful workshop to participate, or to watch rather. And like I said, it's totally available online. You can watch it from start to finish, you know, so that might be an avenue to approach. 2 different methods of contact. And then also, you know, just please participate in more of these as well, because you'll learn lots. But thank you. Sweet. Again, Freddie, sorry I couldn't answer your question in better detail, but I will get an answer for you. And with, I suppose, unless anyone else has any questions, that's it for the workshop. I'll put it up on YouTube either tomorrow or on Friday. Sorry, or on Thursday rather. But yes, thank you again all for participating. I really appreciate it. Shoot me an email if you have any questions or anything at all. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Thanks again. Bye-bye.